What is man's addiction to war? Every day there is a war somewhere. Now it's Israel, and you can see it on TV. Hamas made an attack on Israel, and now there's retaliation. On that topic of war, we have a special guest, Mr. Vinod Munasinghe. How should I address you?
I'm a journalist, I'm an engineer, I've been a consultant to the government and to private firms, and I have a fair knowledge about foreign affairs. I write about foreign affairs.
So, what is your take on this Israel affair? What is happening?
Well, you have to go discuss the present context of Israel. You have to go back more than 100 years.
100 years?
More than 100 years. You have to go back to 1838. At the time, Palestine, as the area has been called historically, was under the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottoman Empire was in conflict with the Russian Empire. And the British had a commonality of purpose with the Ottomans because they were frightened that the Russians would attack India, which was their biggest possession. So they to bolster the Ottoman Empire, they decided that they would introduce Jewish settlers into Palestine, so that they would have that the Jewish settlers would act on behalf of the British Empire.
So they would have more like ground hold on that
Exactly, yeah. In fact, there were several Sri Lankan British civil servants who were in Sri Lanka who were involved in this. For example, there was E.L. Mitford, who was in the CCS. He started writing, he visited Palestine in about 1840, 39-40, and he started writing about the Jewish question, and he suggested that the British establish a complete Jewish homeland and expel all the Palestinians from the area, and that it would be a stronghold for the British Empire to protect the route to India.
It's only for trade, to protect their trade, or
trade and the military route. And this was obviated to a certain extent when with the passing of events, with the Crimean War and so on, but they continued with this policy. And then Lawrence Oliphant, who was the son of the Chief Justice of Sri Lanka, he came up with a suggestion he came up actually with a blueprint for settling Palestine with Jewish settlers. And this blueprint which he created was actually the one which was followed by the later Zionist settlers in the 20th century. So
if I am to sum it up, that the whole problem which is going on now was created by the British, is it fair?
Yes, that would be fair, because in 1845, if I remember rightly, the Council of Rabbis decided that they were not going to include a prayer which said tomorrow in Jerusalem. That because the focus of Jewish immigration from, actually the Jews were considered as second-class citizens, they were being oppressed in Europe, and they decided they would find a new home in the United States.
Why cutting in? Like, why were they considered like second-class citizens?
There are a lot of there are historical reasons for this. For the Jewish population actually in Europe and around the world existed as a trading and money-lending caste.
So they were lower in caste to other.
Yes, they were money lenders in Europe especially, and there are many Europeans who converted to Judaism and married the daughters of the Jews and became Jews themselves.
For business purposes?
For business purposes. And because in the Jewish religion the descent is by the female line, their children became Jews automatically.
The surname is shared from the woman's
side? Lot of them got the name Franken, which means Frank, Frenchman, right? And now I have certain ancestors who were born in what is now Belgium, and they had the name Franken. And that's beside the point. But,
what does it mean, that name?
It means that they are the Frenchmen or West European.
So you got
like the famous Anne Frank, who died in the Second World War, was killed in the Second World War. Her name is Frank. So it suggests that she had West European ancestry. So what happened is that the what you call the Jews today, if you look at the population, they're all mixed with all the local populations. It is not a pure Jewish population.
It's a mixed race.
It's a mixed race. If you go to Mumbai, you'll find that all the Jews there look like Indians. If you go to Northern Europe, the Jews there look like Northern Europeans. You get so many actors who have got blonde hair and blue eyes.
It's somewhat similar to what is happening in Sri Lanka, isn't it?
Yes, everybody. I mean, if you take the Muslim population in Sri Lanka, it has got a similar sort of background. Very few of them have got Arab blood anymore. Most of them have got local blood.
So, in that context, with all the races getting mixed and cultural harmony and all that, why is this still raging on?
Well, there wasn't cultural harmony at that time, which is, I mean, you got the Jews fleeing from Europe and because of this. The Tsar of Russia used to have what are called pogroms, which is attacks on Jewish populations.
Reason being?
Because they were Jews. Basically, what happens is that by focusing on the Jewish people, blaming the Jewish people for their problems, the rulers were able to escape from
their current day-to-day problems.
Yes, current day-to-day problems.
Sounds a bit like Sri Lanka.
A bit like that, yeah. So, what happened is that the Jews are fleeing from Western Europe, mainly to America. Then, in the 1890s, because of these pogroms, there was a chap called Herzl, a Jewish man. He came up with this.
He published the book, isn't it?
Yes, he published a book. He expressed this view about Zionism.
Zionism.
The idea that the Jewish people are above others and that they should have their own homeland. That was in 1894. Then he approached the British government, and the British government actually started negotiating with the Zionists to establish a Jewish homeland in Uganda and to expel the population of Uganda and install Jewish people.
Because the British were so powerful.
And they wanted to have an outpost in the middle of Africa. But then that passed.
Didn't work out.
Yeah. Then in about 1905, the British Navy decided to go for oil instead of coal. For oil-fired ships instead of coal. And oil became very important to the British Empire.
Who at that time, who produced oil as a country?
Well, Iran. The British in Iran, with another story, there Cargill, who formed Cargill's shop here
Ceylon.
in Ceylon, he started a company called Burma Oil or Burma Oil. And Burma Oil became what is known as the Anglo-Persian Oil Company. And they were pumping the oil out of Persia, out of Iran.
They were trading companies.
Yes. Now they wanted, then there were various Middle Eastern countries which had oil. This was a very important thing for the British, so they once again revived the idea of a Jewish homeland. And they participated with the Zionists in this project. So in 1917, the British minister called William Balfour signed an agreement that they would be creating a Jewish homeland in Palestine.
Did they ask the permission of the Palestinian people?
No, they didn't. They didn't. Actually, they were promising the Arab people and the Palestinian people that they would have their homeland. So they were giving two different sets of promises.
So they divide and conquer again.
Exactly. So in 1918, at the end of the First World War, the British had control of Palestine.
And they had the resources to do that.
Yeah, they had the resources. They were the most powerful country in the world at the time. They were like the United States was until quite recently. At the end of the war, First World War, they established this their protectorate over Palestine, and they had a military officer called Meinertzhagen who hated Jews.
Was he from German?
He was of German extraction, but he's a British officer, and he hated Jews, but he hated the Palestinians more. Right?
So he was
supporting the Jewish settlement. This was around 1919. And then there was another Zionist an extremist Zionist called Jabotinsky, or Jabotinsky, of Polish origin. he started an organization called Haganah in 1919.
The military
Wing of the settlers. So he started provoking the Palestinians. For example, in 1920 there was a demonstration by the Palestinians asking for independence for Palestine, and he provoked these things by various means, and then a clash started out.
At that, if you can recall, what was the population of the Palestinians at that time? A couple of millions, or
no. It was a relatively small population, about 700,000, of about 40,000 or 50,000 were Jews.
Yeah.
Now, Jews have existed in Palestine from the early era.
They didn't have any problem at that time?
No, they had no problem at all. In fact, the population of Palestine was basically composed of Jews who had converted to Christianity, and some of them had converted to Islam.
So the British coming into the scene only created this problem?
Yes. There was no major problem between the Muslims and the Jews before that, because under Islam, Jews and Christians are also people of the book. They're the same as Muslims. Yeah.
They had two different saviors.
Yeah. So in 1920, what happened is that now the British came and they started taking the side of the settlers against the people of Palestine. And in the middle of this, Haganah was there also doing this. And then the Jewish people, what they did was they started establishing what they call kibbutzim, which is settlements. And the settlements were armed. The people had arms. And what they did was they used to buy a piece of land from a landowner. And if there were any farmers who were tenant farmers, they would chase them out. So this way they were dispossessing the Palestinians of their land through these means.
They were acquiring land.
But it was a commercial transaction. They were buying the land, but then chasing off the people who had been farming it for years.
So they didn't basically have a choice.
No, they didn't have a choice. They were mainly tenant farmers. The land, they would buy it from the landowner, some feudal landowner, and these people were his tenants.
Like other Govi in Sri Lanka.
Yes, so they would chase off the other Govis basically. Then, so they were slowly expanding this way. In 1926, the United States passed a law saying that limiting the number of Jews who could come into the United States. So then
Why were they attracted to United States? What was the thing for them?
There was relative freedom. And the New Jerusalem was New York. New York is the biggest Jewish city in the world. So
the creation of Hollywood was also...
Yes, it was by Jews who had moved from New York to California.
They are the ones to come up with these cameras and all that stuff.
Because of their socio-economic situation, they were very educated.
They were highly intelligent.
Intelligence is a question of, is nothing to do with ethnicity, but the education is. They were highly educated people, even if they were uneducated when they were in Russia. When they came to the United States, they became educated. They were quick to get educated. For example, Isaac Asimov, the famous science and science fiction writer, he was born in Russia, but he got his PhD in the United States, and he's one of the most brilliant people that you could find those days.
Basically, the Jews supported anything of intellectual value.
Yes. So they produced so many great thinkers like Einstein, Karl Marx.
The list is pretty long.
Yes, a fairly long list. So, but in 1926, the United States stopped them from coming. So then all the people who were escaping from the pogroms and so on started settling in Palestine. Then when Hitler started killing Jews.
What was Hitler's role in that? Why did he have that much of hatred towards the Jews? What caused that thing?
It was not just Hitler. It was an anti-Semitic feeling among a certain section of the population, and this was exacerbated because the anti-Semitic literature blamed the problems of the country on the Jews. For example, you got people like Rothschild, who were big bankers, who were Jews. But it didn't make all the bankers Jews. And but they were blaming all the faults about debt and so on the Rothschilds. And they said that the Rothschilds are controlling the world.
It's still going on as a conspiracy theory.
Yeah. And when the Russian Revolution took place, they blamed the Russian Revolution on the Jews. And they called it the Jewish Bolshevik conspiracy.
So they were easy targets for any kind of blame.
Yes. So anyway, so a lot of them started fleeing from Europe. And they were not allowed to go to the United States or go to Britain.
So
they had to flee to Palestine. There were a lot of Jews who fled to South Africa. And that's an interesting thing because South Africa, the Jews were integrated into the South African apartheid system.
Again, another British colony.
And now during that, in the 1930s, the Arabs, the Palestinians rose up against the British in 1936. And then the British started giving military training to Haganah.
Purpose being?
To fight the Arabs.
Okay. So they want to keep the Arabs below a certain level.
The basic problem, the basic reasoning of the British in establishing the Jewish homeland in Palestine was to keep the Arabs down.
Why was it? Were they scared of them? Or
well, they wanted to have a hold over the oil.
Oil was the main thing.
Oil was the main thing. And since then it has been the main thing. It is the main reason why the United States has been supporting Israel is that proximity to the oil. So Israel provides a base camp. Like an aircraft carrier in the middle of the Middle East.
They have a place to land and conduct their affairs. So now in the mass media,
if you could go back a bit to 1948, which is the most important thing. During the war, the Zionists took part in the British campaigns. They joined the British army and fought on the British side against the Germans. Then, so as a result, with the Haganah who had been trained by the British and by the Haganah forces which had been trained during the Second World War, they had a very strong army. Then in 1946, they formulated a policy called Plan Dalit. Plan Dalit was for chasing all the Palestinians in Palestine out
from their homeland. So why is it that the rest of the world only takes the side of Israel when it comes to this? Palestinians they don't have any voice. Why is it happening?
Well, it's because of this whole power structure thing. The United States is now the controlling major power in the world, and they support Israel. So all the other powers, their satellite powers, all support Israel. From 1948, there's a myth that has been built up that Israel is a small country which is surrounded by all these larger enemies. But from 1948 onwards, since they chased out the Palestinians, the UN actually partitioned Palestine, but the Israelis captured sections of
they gained more land.
Gained more land than the partition plan.
Because those guys, Palestinians didn't have military power.
No, they didn't have any military power. But at the time, when they partitioned Palestine, only 6% of Palestine was owned by Jews. The whole rest of it was Palestinian.
But because of the Israel military might, they managed to...
and the partition plan, they divided it into two halves, which is completely wrong.
That was proposed by the British?
By the United Nations, which is basically the United States. And so even that plan, the Israelis rejected because they took over the more Palestinian territory. So they have more than they were actually allocated by the United Nations in 1948. Then 1967, again, through expansion, they took over what remained of the Palestinian territories, and they also took a chunk out of Syria as well.
Just breaking the thing, like I heard of a guy called Yasser Arafat, the PLO chairman. And I have seen him in mass media going back and forth going for discussions, trying to come to some settlement between the Palestine people and the Israelis. I was a kid at that time. I was trying to figure out what is this old man trying to do in a weird wig and all that. And finally, he got killed, right? And, but on that particular point, what was Yasser Arafat's role into this Israel-Palestine conflict?
Well, following the what the Palestinians call the Nakba, which is the dispossession of Palestinians from their homeland, a lot of them are concentrated in these refugee camps. Most of them today, most of the Palestinians today are still refugees.
In very bad living conditions.
Yes. And it was in these camps that the Palestine Liberation Organization was formed. And Yasser Arafat was the leader. And he led a struggle against the Israelis.
Did they have any support from these other countries like Iran?
No.
That is the
not at that
right
time.
now.
Not at that time. In 1967, they didn't have support. They were
not from any country.
They built up their independent support. Then,
where did they get the funds? I mean, to have any kind of organization going, you have to have funds.
Yeah, they had their own diaspora. Then they did get help from countries like the Soviet Union.
Why was the Soviet Union involved in their struggle?
For geopolitical reasons.
Against the West.
Yeah, but I must remind you that the Communist International in the 1930s supported the Palestinian people. They supported the Palestinian people in their struggle. I have read an article in the Samasamaja newspaper of 1937 by Harry Pollitt of the British Communist Party, who wrote in support of the Palestinian people's struggle. And he said that only by the Jews and the Arabs joining together will they be able to achieve the true liberation of Palestine.
Not in division, but
not in division, but in unity. And but that's not how it has turned out. What has happened is that the more and more immigrants have been coming to Israel, because it's very unfair that the Palestinians who are chased out do not have the right to return to their homes. But people who have no connection whatsoever to Palestine can come and settle there, and they are given houses, they are given jobs, houses, weapons, and these are the people whom they put at the border with Gaza and the West Bank. And what they've been doing in the last period is they have been cutting up what's left of the West Bank with huge walls which divide the Palestinian lands from the Jewish lands, but in the Palestinian area allocated to the Palestinians. So they have now cut them up into little clumps, isolated clumps, so that the West Bank is not a viable institution. On the other side, in Gaza has been kept like a prison camp. I think something like 80% of the population are refugees. So they have been kept in these horrible conditions. There are 2 or 3 million people in this tiny piece of land, which sort of is the same as the area from Colombo to Katana, right? It's the same kind of strip of land.
Why isn't the UN taking part in?
Well, the UN resolution in 1948 called for the return of the lands to the Palestinian people.
So nobody heard that?
It was heard, it passed by the General Assembly, but no action has been taken on it.
But in the UN there is a veto, 2 countries have veto power,
but this was not vetoed.
This
is the agreement that everybody agreed on in 1948. Nothing happened. The Israelis refused to allow them to return.
And the Americans backed them.
In fact, the Palestinians would not have an objection to living in Israel if they are given the right to return. But they are not being given the right to return to their homes. That's a major problem in Palestine.
So if I am to sum it up, that the Palestinians lost their homeland, and they can't fight for their rights because Israel is supported by other big countries.
Yes.
Is that the truth?
Yes, that's not about right.
So nobody can challenge the truth.
No.
Then why is it in media that there is a lot of sympathy for Israel and no sympathy at all for Palestinians? Isn't it one-sided?
Yes, but then if you look at the Western media, it is one-sided. Everything is one-sided. At one time in the 1960s and 70s, you got a great deal of freedom in the media where people were able to express different opinions. But since the 1980s, since the arrival of neoliberalism, media has become one-tracked.
Yeah, now, I like to add one more thing. Now, Trump.
Yes.
Trump is fighting a war within his own country against a so-called cabal. And he, at one point, said, these guys are fake media. I was really like upset the moment I heard that. Why is it one of the US presidents, one of the most powerful countries' presidents, saying straight to their face, you're fake media? It got me thinking. What is your take on that? Why did he make such a statement? Does it have any relevance to the media being controlled by certain political forces in the international front?
Yes, definitely. Now, for example, you get Rupert Murdoch, who was earlier supporting Trump, but
has he fallen out?
well, they are not really supporting Trump anymore.
The reason being like
Well, it's like this. You see, the way that American politics has developed in the recent past, the Democrat Party used to be the liberal party of the working classes and so on, and the left-leaning people. The Republican Party was the party of the tycoons.
the ones who have the wealth.
Yeah, the ones who had the wealth. But in that period, since under the neoliberalism, productive capital, that is, people who own industries, who own farms, they have become marginalized, and the power has gone to the people, the banks, the financial sector, the people who own the stock market.
There's a big class difference.
The Democratic Party has now become the party of the financial sector. Whereas Trump and company is the party of the producers, of the industrialists and the big farmers, big agribusiness. So there is a divide in US society, and the ones who are on top are the financial sector. So this was not a problem earlier, because when Bush came, he also supported the financial sector. When there was a meltdown in 2008, he supported the financial sector. But since then, with Obama and his successors, like Biden, they have more and more taken the part of the finance sector, whereas Trump and his supporters were supporting the industrialists and
the ones who produce goods.
So they are the ones who are trying to make, when they said make the United States great, they were trying to create new industry, bring back industry to the United States, because the United States is no longer an industrial power.
A lot of stuff went to China, isn't it?
Yeah, and if you look at the war in the Ukraine, you can see that the Russians are outproducing the entire Western world. Because they have the industry.
Yeah, I want to barge in there.
Yeah.
Is that the reason why Ukraine was separated from Russia? Because they couldn't compete with Russia?
No, there were lots of, that's a very complex, that's an entirely different question regarding Ukraine. Basically, none of the people of Ukraine or Belarus or of Russia wanted to have a separate countries, because there was a referendum just before this happened, and the whole people in the whole of the USSR voted that they wanted to remain in the USSR. But three leaders, led by Yeltsin, decided they were going to separate into three countries. So that is why you got Russia and Ukraine and Belarus as separate countries.
Was the West involved in that thing?
Yeah, definitely, because Yeltsin was a tool of the West. He was basically he was a drunkard who was doing anything that they told, anybody who gave him a bottle would do.
So the West had a hold on him.
Yeah.
Yeah, so now what is happening in Israel? Now Hamas on one side they are called terrorists. I don't want to call them terrorists, because I think that's why I asked you about certain questions about the Palestine people. I feel that they are being unfairly treated, but the media is playing a picture that is totally taking the side of the Israelis. So they are now the Hamas is called a terrorist organization, and then there's another organization called Hezbollah or something. And both parties at the 3 days into fighting, they say that they are going to fight to the bitter end. What would you think that will be the final outcome will be?
Well, just to backtrack a bit on the terrorism business, I have read an article written in 1948 where a British newspaper calls the Zionist groups who were fighting the British at the time, just before independence, they were calling them terrorists. Right, because they were carrying out acts of terrorism. Now, when they chased the people, they placed a bomb in the King David Hotel in the middle of Jerusalem, blowing it up. They killed, they placed bombs in buses, which were where Palestinians were going.
That was done by the Mossad?
No, by Haganah.
Haganah is the party that turned into Mossad, isn't it?
No, Haganah became the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces. There were three groups. There was the Haganah, which was the mainstream, Irgun Tzvi Leumi, which was a separate one, and a break-off from Irgun Tzvi Leumi was Lehumei Herut Yisrael, which was called the Stern Gang. It was led by a man called Avraham Stern, and later by Yitzhak Shamir. So all these people who became prime ministers of Israel were who had been leaders of these terrorist organizations. And
so they were
terrorist organizations.
So why are they calling Hamas a terrorist organization?
Well, exactly. One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter.
Right. Okay. Now you said Haganah is not the direct continuation to what is called Mossad now. And but now Mossad is looked upon as the best secret service in the world. And then I have seen movies, Victory at Entebbe and Delta Force and the Hollywood aspect coming into this whole thing. After 3 days of this fighting and lives lost on both sides, what will be the final outcome according to you?
Well, we're still early days yet. Now, if you look at the context in which this took place, we were speaking earlier about what happened in Ukraine. The United States has been unable to keep the Ukrainians supplied with the amount of ammunition they need to defeat the Russians.
That was coming through NATO, right?
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
The Russians have been outproducing NATO. Then you get the situation that now, when this was launched, the West has bereft itself of weapons because they have been supplying that to Ukraine. Now they have now made a target, their principal target for supply of weapons, Israel. That means that Ukraine is not going to get those weapons anymore.
Yeah.
So what you're going to see, first of all, is the Russians sweeping through the Ukrainian forces. Meanwhile, here, if the Hamas know this, they know that the Israelis are at a disadvantage, comparative disadvantage to what they were earlier.
The US government had an annual budget to support Israel, right?
Yes.
It came up to $3 billion.
$3.5 billion, yeah.
So have they stopped that?
No, that keeps going.
It's mainly among this.
Yeah. In fact, the Israeli economy, which is booming, has been kept afloat basically by monies which are pumped from different countries, from Western countries. For example, the Germans built up the entire transport network using reparations from the Second World War, which they didn't pay to any other country.
Yeah, in 2016, we got to know about a spyware, basically called Pegasus.
Yeah.
And the whole world shook up, and the Israelis were willing to sell it to any government who wanted to access that. And now Pegasus, it happened in 2016. Now, what I can see is that Israel has very liberal policies when it comes to making money. They would do spyware, they would go to war, they could anything to infiltrate and take over. That is my point of view. But what is portrayed in the mass media is a total different picture, with people crying, and the lot of narratives are done in US. And if you are into mass media, you can see that they are like stories wanting to be told to the masses to get certain answers. But from the Palestinian side, they have no narrative. They have no support, and now there's a new accusation that Iran is supporting the Iranians. The Iran government is supporting them underneath without just to keep the rockets and everything coming in. So, is there any, are they using this to go and attack Iran? Or like, what is really happening there?
What I feel is that, as I said, the Western powers are overstretched now. They are stretched in the Ukraine. Now they are losing the Sahel region of Africa. Then in the East, they tried to go head to head with China over Taiwan, and now they have stepped back because they realized they couldn't go forward. So we are in the middle of a stalemate, and this is going to affect the Israeli-Palestinian situation. That's my personal feeling. What my take on what Hamas is trying to do is it's trying to drag the other Arab countries and Iran into this struggle. So, because that would, if a coalition like that is created, like happened in 1974, 73, 74, after the first Yom Kippur War, this could be called the second Yom Kippur War. You remember those days they basically had an oil embargo, and that prevented any Israeli expansion. Because they were affecting the Western countries. Now, if the Arab countries get together and do that again, you will find a completely different situation.
But we have the OPEC in place. How will it impact the OPEC countries?
Yeah, so OPEC was what acted on behalf of the Arabs those days.
But it's not acting.
And now you're going to have Russia and the OPEC. Chinese have said that the Palestinians have a role. There's a cause for them to fight. So I think what's going to happen ultimately is there's going to be a stalemate, and Israel will be forced to go to the negotiating table and relinquish the land on the West Bank and give it back to the Palestinians and create a two-state solution. A two-state solution is not ideal, but it's the best we can hope for at this current context.
Yeah, now just to end this discussion, I know this can go on. I'd like to continue, and I wish that a lot of people will know about what is the background story to what is happening now. And just now, Sri Lanka is in a crisis. The two of us are having this conversation in Sri Lanka with IMF basically giving us aid to keep it going. Now, I have a list of stuff here, like, the imports from Israel. This was on the net 2022. Diamonds, yarn, electrical and electronic products, processed vegetables, fruits, juices, products, and like about 20 products coming from Israel. And how will this war affect Sri Lanka? Because we are already in a crisis. How will it impact us?
The war is more likely to impact us in the sense of getting halting the supplies of oil, rather than the fact that we lose Israeli exports. Imports from Israel is not going to affect us because those can be sourced from other countries. There are certain reasons for our people importing from Israel which are unrelated to their economic status. For example, now when you take Jaffa oranges, Jaffa oranges were actually developed first by Arabs, by Palestinians. They were exported as Jaffa oranges from the Arab town, the Palestinian town of Jaffa. So those oranges can be grown in Palestine. I
heard another story to that. Maybe it's a rumor. I heard during Mrs. Bandaranaike's regime that the oranges from Bibile were taken to Israel and
no, that's not.
Is
true.
that that's just a hoax?
That's a hoax.
Yeah. So then.
But what I'm saying is that now those oranges, things like oranges, can be grown in, say, Iran. Iran is Saudi Arabia. They have regions which are lush and able to produce this kind of thing. Now look at olive oil. Palestine's earliest export was olive oil. Olive oil, oranges, right?
Now they don't.
But now we get our olive oil from Spain and from Italy and from Australia.
So what is the main income of the Palestinian people as of now? Because
exports from they may have lots more. Most of the income is from aid from the Palestinian diaspora, and they manufacture things like headscarves. Which they export.
But you said that they are living in refugee camps.
Yes.
And while living in those, can they produce anything of value to the international?
Those things that they can do that, but most of their income comes from Palestinians going and working in Israel.
They still entertain the Palestinian labor in Israel.
Yeah. Otherwise, they can't survive. That's why they're trying to bring people from Sri Lanka and places like that too.
I heard one lady got killed recently, one Sri Lankan,
yes.
and another one injured. That's what I heard in news. So like,
so they have been taken there to replace Palestinians.
Anybody to replace a Palestinian? Okay. So they don't mind Asians going there.
No.
Right? You said that now the oil thing. Now recently Sri Lanka has introduced more players into the market. The excuse or whatever given to the people was that more players coming in will bring the price down. That is not happening. It's going up. But in this present scenario, like you say that Israel, the war with Israel will not affect our oil inputs or whatever, and the price. Now,
no, it will affect our
it will affect.
The prices will probably go up.
Israel is not producing oil, is it?
No. But the effect on the other countries, where the ones who might put an oil embargo or raise the price of oil, will affect Israel.
Just to keep the war from going from bad to worse, right? So it will have an indirect impact on what is ours. Okay, Vinod, I want to continue this, but my production team says that, I have to put a stop to the thing. And again, I like to thank Vinod for participating. Thank you.
Thank you.